The Middle Ages produced weapons that went beyond the purpose of killing. They were made to terrify, to break the human body, and to send a message long after the blood dried. Soldiers, kings, and inquisitors turned steel, wood, and fire into tools of fear that shaped entire centuries. Behind every castle wall and battlefield, there were devices built not only for victory, but for pain. Each one carried its own method of ending life or twisting it until it begged to stop. These weapons became legends, remembered not for skill or honor, but for what they revealed about cruelty and imagination. In a time when power ruled and mercy was rare, seeing any of them meant one thing: death would not come quickly. Number 1. The Iron Maiden. A tall metal coffin stood in the dim light of medieval dungeons, cold, heavy, and lined with spikes on the inside. The Iron Maiden was built to trap a person in a steel embrace that tore the body apart inch by inch. The victim was pushed inside, the door slammed shut, and hundreds of sharp points pierced the skin. They did not strike deep enough to kill instantly. The body bled slowly. The heart kept beating while pain filled every nerve. Air came through small holes so the screams could last longer. The Iron Maiden was not made for mercy. It was made for control. The spikes were placed with precision to avoid the heart, lungs, and major arteries. A man could remain alive for hours. Blood soaked the floor. Guards listened to the sounds from within, calm and detached. In some designs, the inside was curved to force the body into an unnatural pose. Breathing became hard. Moving only made the spikes cut deeper. The device turned the human body into its own prison. Many historians believe that the Iron Maiden was a later invention, built to symbolize medieval cruelty more than to serve it. Yet stories about it appeared in the late Middle Ages, often in German and English records. The image of a body sealed inside a metal shell became a warning passed through generations. Whether it was used in real torture chambers or created later for fear itself, it carried the same message. Defiance had a price that ended in silence. Reports from Nuremberg described an Iron Maiden tall enough for a grown man. Its door was covered in a carved face, painted in calm expression. Inside, hundreds of steel spikes waited. The door shut with a sound that echoed through the stone hall. Once locked, there was no release. The person inside could not even fall. Muscles cramped. The mind broke before the heart stopped. Some versions had drainage holes at the bottom so blood could flow out cleanly. Others were equipped with tiny slits to let the torturer watch the process. The design mixed horror with order. Pain was not chaos, it was planned. Every piece of iron was shaped for a reason. Even if the Iron Maiden was never widely used, its legend shaped how people imagined medieval justice. It stood for power without mercy. The thought of being trapped upright, pierced but not dead, haunted prisoners long before they ever saw it. It was not just a device, it was an idea. The kind that survives longer than flesh. The Iron Maiden remains one of the most chilling symbols of human cruelty. Its name still sounds like a prayer left unanswered. Number 2. The saw. The saw was a simple carpenter's tool that became one of the most feared instruments of death in medieval Europe. It required no special skill to use, no expensive materials to build, and no mercy to operate. Executioners and inquisitors preferred it for the way it turned ordinary labor into terror. The condemned was hung upside down, tied by the ankles, with their legs apart. Blood rushed to the head, keeping the victim conscious. The saw began its slow path downward from the groin. The cut was steady, cruel, and deliberate. The heart continued to pump blood, keeping the brain awake long after the body had been opened. Records describe this method used in parts of France, Germany, and the Ottoman territories. It was common against those accused of treason, heresy, or murder. The upside-down position had a purpose. It ensured that the person would stay alive through the first half of the sawing. The sound of the blade tearing through bone and muscle filled the air. The body swung slightly as each pull of the saw tore deeper. Witnesses spoke of the smell of iron and blood, of the silence that followed when even screams could no longer escape. The saw was often a standard woodcutting blade, sharpened before each use. In public squares, it hung beside the gallows as a reminder of punishment. Some were long enough to require 2 men to pull in rhythm. Others were short and handled by one executioner, who worked slowly to make the suffering visible. Punishment by sawing could last for hours. Some executions were said to continue until the blade reached the chest and the heart stopped beating. The goal was not only death, but fear. People were meant to remember the sound. In Spain and parts of Eastern Europe, the saw was used during inquisitions. It served both as a method of torture and as execution. Accused heretics who refused to confess were shown the blade first. Many broke before it ever touched them. Its horror was not in speed, but in patience. Each pull of the saw made the punishment personal. It stripped away dignity, identity, and hope. Chroniclers from the Middle Ages wrote that victims rarely lost consciousness until the saw reached the abdomen. The body's own position kept them aware longer than nature should allow. Some accounts mention executioners pausing to sharpen the blade while the person still lived. The rhythm of metal against the grindstone mixed with the muffled cries of pain. The saw needed no flame or poison. It worked with gravity and human endurance. Its simplicity made it spread through centuries. Farmers, soldiers, and rebels all knew how it worked. In war, captured enemies were sometimes executed the same way, not for justice, but for warning. The sight of a man hung upside down over a wooden frame with blood dripping to the ground was enough to quiet entire villages. The saw was not an invention of genius. It was an invention of cruelty, a tool that turned the act of cutting wood into the slow destruction of a human being. It left no glory, no valor, no redemption, only silence and the echo of the blade moving back and forth until nothing was left to cut. Number 3. The Catherine Wheel. The Catherine Wheel was one of the most brutal instruments of execution in medieval Europe. A large wooden wheel taken from a wagon, or built specifically for punishment, became a device of slow and public destruction. The condemned person was tied across the spokes, arms and legs stretched wide. Iron clubs or hammers were used to shatter the bones, starting from the limbs and moving inward. The wheel turned with each strike. The sound of breaking bones echoed through the square, while the crowd watched in silence. The executioner worked carefully to avoid killing too quickly. The goal was not mercy, but endurance. When the body was reduced to a twisted shape, the remains were woven between the spokes. The wheel was then raised upright on a pole, so everyone could see the broken form turning in the wind. Some victims were left alive in that state. Birds circled above, and the sun burned their skin. Death came from shock, blood loss, or exposure. In some towns, the bodies were displayed for days as a warning. The wheel became a symbol of punishment reserved for crimes seen as unforgivable. Murderers, thieves, and rebels often faced it. Historical accounts describe its use across Germany, France, and the Low Countries. Chronicles from the 14th and 15th centuries mention men surviving for hours after their bones were crushed. Executioners trained to control the force of each blow. Too hard, and the victim died instantly. Too soft, and the punishment lost its effect. Some wheels had sharp edges of metal fixed along the rim to make the blows even more devastating. The tool that once rolled across fields was turned into a frame of agony. The Catherine wheel was named centuries later, connected to the legend of Saint Catherine of Alexandria. According to stories, she was sentenced to be broken on such a wheel, but the device shattered before it could harm her. The association gave the punishment both a religious and cultural weight. It carried the image of divine suffering twisted into human cruelty. In many towns, the wheel stood near the city gates where everyone could see it. Travelers entered and left under the shadow of what remained of the condemned. The bones whitened under the weather, becoming part of the landscape. It was a message that law ruled above life. The design of the wheel varied, but its purpose never changed. It combined torture, execution, and spectacle in one act. There were cases where mercy was offered through a final strike to the chest, known as the coup de grace. Not every victim received it. Some begged for that blow and never got it. The Catherine wheel did not rely on sharpness or fire. It used patience, strength, and the steady rhythm of breaking wood and bone. The memory of it survived long after the last wheel rotted away. Its name still stands for suffering made into a public performance. Number 4. The Scavenger's Daughter. The Scavenger's Daughter was a metal device designed to crush the human body from head to toe. It worked opposite to the rack, which stretched limbs apart. This one folded the body inward until bones pressed against organs and blood poured from the nose and ears. The prisoner was forced to kneel and curl forward. Iron bars closed around the shoulders, knees, and back. A heavy hinge locked in place, driving the body into itself. Each breath became shorter. The chest could not expand. Pain grew until the victim lost consciousness. The device appeared in 16th century England during the reign of Henry VIII. It was credited to Sir Leonard Skeffington, Lieutenant of the Tower of London, whose name twisted over time into Scavenger. It was used on those accused of treason, espionage, and conspiracy. The purpose was not only to inflict suffering, but to break resistance. Interrogators believed that unbearable compression would force quick confessions. Some prisoners emerged alive but paralyzed or unable to speak. Others died inside the frame, crushed by their own ribs. The frame was made of thick iron bands shaped like a letter A. The top pressed against the shoulders, the middle tightened around the back, and the bottom pinned the legs. Once closed, it turned the body into a compact mass. The internal pressure ruptured veins and damaged organs. Blood filled the mouth and trickled down the neck. Executioners could open it at intervals to question the victim, then lock it again for another round. The device required no heat or blades. It relied entirely on the strength of metal and the limits of flesh. Witnesses described scenes inside the tower where guards wiped the floor after each use. The smell of iron mixed with the smell of blood. Records mention that some victims fainted immediately, while others remained awake long enough to scream until their lungs collapsed. The silence that followed was used as proof that the interrogation had succeeded. Unlike other instruments of torture, the Scavenger's Daughter left few visible wounds. The damage stayed hidden beneath the skin. It was favored for its efficiency and the illusion of cleanliness. There was no fire, no whipping, no public spectacle. Only the quiet sound of iron closing and the muffled cries that came after. The prisoner could be taken away still breathing, but often died hours later from internal bleeding. Examples of the device survive today in museum collections. Its rusted shape still carries the outline of human suffering. The design is simple, yet the purpose behind it remains chilling. It represents a time when power was measured by how much pain a body could endure before breaking. The Scavenger's Daughter stands as one of the darkest creations of the English torture chambers, a weapon that turned pressure itself into a method of control. Number 5. The Great Bombard. The Great Bombard was one of the largest and most fearsome siege weapons ever built during the late Middle Ages. It marked the beginning of a new era in warfare, when gunpowder turned stone walls into dust. The weapon was a massive cannon, forged from iron or bronze and mounted on wooden platforms that could barely hold its weight. Some versions reached lengths of over 20 feet and fired projectiles weighing hundreds of kilograms. Each shot required hours of preparation and a crew of dozens. The sound of its firing was said to shake the ground and echo for miles. The Great Bombard appeared in Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries. Early versions were built in England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, but the most famous examples came from the Ottoman Empire. These giant cannons were used in sieges to crush the defenses of fortified cities. Their job was to destroy walls that had stood for centuries. No castle, no matter how strong, could withstand continuous bombardment from weapons of this size. The stones fired from their barrels broke through towers, gates, and bastions. The explosions created panic among defenders who had never faced such power. To fire a single round, soldiers filled the chamber with gunpowder, packed it tightly, and loaded the projectile with ropes and levers. The charge was ignited through a small opening, releasing a burst of smoke and fire that sent the stone hurtling forward at deadly speed. The recoil was enormous. Sometimes the cannon itself rolled backward or cracked under its own force. Reloading could take several hours. Yet even one successful hit could change the course of a siege. Walls that had taken decades to build could collapse in minutes. One of the most legendary examples was the bombard built for Sultan Mehmed II during the siege of Constantinople in 1453. It was designed by the Hungarian engineer Orban and could fire stones weighing more than half a ton. The cannon's blasts shattered the mighty Theodosian walls that had protected the Byzantine capital for 1,000 years. The defenders tried to repair the damage each night, but the power of the bombard made their efforts useless. When the city finally fell, it marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and the rise of Ottoman dominance. The weapon became a symbol of unstoppable force and human ingenuity mixed with destruction. The Great Bombard was difficult to move. Armies needed teams of oxen, wooden rollers, and entire crews of engineers to transport it. Roads broke under its weight. Bridges had to be reinforced before crossing. Sometimes the weapon was built near the battlefield because it was too heavy to haul over long distances. Despite the effort, rulers continued to fund its construction. The presence of such a cannon in an army's arsenal meant psychological advantage as much as physical power. By the end of the 15th century, smaller and more efficient cannons replaced the bombards. The great iron giants became relics, displayed in castles and museums. One of them, known as Mons Meg, still survives in Edinburgh Castle, a silent witness to the age when warfare turned from muscle to gunpowder. The Great Bombard remains a reminder of the moment when human ambition learned to break stone with fire and thunder. Number 6. The Boiling Cauldron. The Boiling Cauldron was one of the most terrifying methods of execution used in medieval Europe. A large iron pot stood above a roaring fire filled with water, oil, tar, or even molten metal. The condemned was lowered into the liquid while it boiled. The process was slow and deliberate. Executioners often began with the feet, letting the heat climb upward while the crowd watched. Steam rose around the victim as skin blistered and peeled. The smell of burning flesh spread through the air. The person rarely lost consciousness immediately. The human body endured more than most expected. Every nerve sent pain until the organs shut down. Records from England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire describe boiling as a punishment for poisoners, counterfeiters, and traitors. It was considered a fitting death for crimes seen as secret and deceitful. In 1531, King Henry VIII of England ordered that poisoners be boiled alive after a cook attempted to murder guests in a bishop's household. Witnesses reported that the man was chained inside the pot and lowered slowly. The sentence was carried out in public as a warning. The people who watched said the screams lasted for a long time. Different regions used their own variations. In parts of Germany and the Netherlands, oil was preferred for its higher temperature. In Eastern Europe, water or wine was used when the goal was symbolic purification before death. Some accounts mention milk or honey, chosen to increase the suffering as the liquid thickened and stuck to the skin. In the Middle East, bronze cauldrons were heated with coals underneath, while prisoners were sealed inside with a lid. When the metal glowed red, the body inside turned black before it was completely destroyed. The cauldron served more than a physical purpose. It was a tool of fear and control. The sight of it in a town square silenced crowds. The bubbling noise and rising steam became signals of authority. No one needed to speak. The punishment itself spoke louder than any decree. In medieval law, pain was not hidden. It was displayed. People gathered to see what justice looked like when mercy no longer existed. Some victims were executed by being dropped into cold liquid and left as it heated. This method prolonged life and pain. The executioner controlled the fire, increasing or decreasing the temperature to keep the prisoner alive for as long as possible. The eyes burned, the lungs filled with steam, and the skin came off in layers. When death finally came, the liquid turned red. Surviving accounts from monasteries and royal courts show that even those who supported such punishments later called them monstrous. The boiling cauldron disappeared from most legal codes by the 17th century, replaced by faster methods. The idea of it remained in stories, sermons, and nightmares. The cauldron symbolized the absolute power of rulers over the human body. It was not just an execution, it was a message carved into memory through fire, heat, and silence.